Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the family panel, a panel all about writing with a family and writing about families. Today we've got Elsie Mawson, Emma Wallace and Claire Ashton. And me. Unfortunately, Lola Keeley, who was going to chair the meeting, is poorly this morning, so I'm going to do it instead, but I'll chip in with some answers as well because, yeah. So hope you get well soon, Lola. It's really sad that you're not here. Never mind. So we will start. We won't introduce Elsie Mawson or Emma Wallace because they were here all day yesterday helping me out and answering interesting questions. However, Claire Ashton was not here yesterday. So Claire, do you want to talk a little bit about your setup at home, your family and what you write in terms of families?
How about that? Hey! Yeah, I didn't prepare this, which was a bit silly because it's a very predictable question to answer, isn't it? I write women-loving women romances and light-hearted ones, some of which were a little bit darker. Families feature very heavily in them. I like writing across the generations in particular. I like old girls and older people around. They bring a lot to it. And also kids. I have two kids. My wife and I have two kids, Ellie and Joe, who are 7 and 9. And yeah, the things they might have said may crop up sometimes in my books.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Elsie Mawson, do you want to talk a little bit about your kind of writing in terms of families and what you do?
I think again, I also like writing cross-generational stuff. That's largely my big urban fantasy series, the Snowverse. Often, cross in one series will have one member of family, and another series will follow a younger member of the family. And a lot of my friends have sort of said, you've basically written like an epic saga, but you've condensed it down into individual series so that it can fit regular urban fantasy. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much exactly what I've done. And yeah, I tend to write a lot about families and yeah, look, like people with kids, people in larger families, and often exploring like the more don't want to say unusual. I mean, the non-nuclear family structures. I think that for me is a interesting thing to write about and explore.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. Emma Wallace, I'm interested to hear about your educational kids books that you wrote before your debut novel. How did they come about?
Okay, so I just thought I should have had a couple of them here that I could show you. I'm just thinking, like, where are they? They're in a box somewhere. So I wrote some books that explain to kids how people might have children in different family setups. So they're, I suppose, like sex education books, but there's a whole series of them, and each one, it's basically the same book but with a different family setup in each book. So there's one where there's a mummy and a mama, a daddy and a papa, a couple that need to use a surrogate to have a baby, and ones where they've adopted a couple of children instead of being able to have children themselves. But the very first one that I wrote was really an autobiographical, how we had our daughter. So it was written for her, but I thought, well, I've written it, why not publish it and let other people be able to read it as well, because there are so few of those sort of books out there. And really, it did actually come about because our dogs had puppies, which is just a bit hilarious. But our dogs were having puppies, and Teddy said at some point something about, and there go my dogs now, how do two girl dogs have puppies? Because to her, two girls having a baby is just normal. And we've got a girl dog and a boy dog, and they had puppies. And we were trying to explain how the two girl dogs wouldn't be able to have puppies together because they aren't humanoid and can't create that situation for themselves because they're dogs. So we sort of explained to her how people might visit a fertility clinic or get donor sperm from a sperm donor. And then I decided to write a book about it. And then people said to me, oh, can you write one about this family setup, this family setup? And it just kind of expanded from there. And there's either 10 or 11 books in the series, which deal with all those different family setups.
Excellent. They sound great. I've seen some of them. I remember at South Coast Lesfic Hangout in Crawley last year, I approached you and you had quite a few. Yeah. So shall I talk about my family and what I write? So we have 3 fur babies, I guess. We call them eldest child, middle child, and youngest child. Whisper is nearly 11. She's a dog. She's an American Bulldog cross, and she's getting a bit old, so she's on supplements for her old lady legs at the moment. We have a cat called Dana, who is just 10. She was a rescue from Cats Protection, and she's the smallest cat I've ever seen that doesn't have dwarfism, because I've seen a cat with dwarfism, and that cat was much smaller. She's only about 3 kilos, but she's a trained assassin and very evil and looks like a kitten. And then we have youngest child, Cooper, who people have probably seen in videos because he's awfully photogenic. He's a Sprockador, so his daddy was a Cocker Spaniel, his mummy was half lab, half Springer. He is a lot bigger than we thought he was going to be. He's a good 10 kilos larger than we thought he was going to be. He is a big boy, but he is lush, and he is, I think, 16 or 17 months at the moment. And he's gorgeous. I obviously don't have human children. I have nearly 4 godchildren. One is on the way and due in January. Yay! But I do write about families. So I've got a lot of single mums in my books, I've realised. Teenage daughters tend to be quite a thing. And then like kids or siblings with disabilities, that seems to be a thing as well. So I've got deaf Adele, who's 12, in Reasons to Heal, and I'm currently writing a 14-year-old Bonnie who's got cerebral palsy. So yeah, it's fun. I really like writing teenage girls. I don't know why. I think they can be quite smarmy and a bit rude and quite amusing. So maybe that's why I like it. But yeah, I've got some families and older ladies again in my books. I've got some 50-year-olds and 40-year-olds, and then like parents of my main characters as well. So yeah, that's what I do, and I write contemporary romance around families and things. Cool. I'm going to have because Lola's not here, she was going to chair the panel, so she had all the questions that she was going to ask. I haven't got any, but I'm sure I'll think of some. We will go to the Facebook live feed because there's a few questions that have arrived. Hi, G. Benson. She has arrived and she's got a question. For those with kids, how do you feel about the idea that one day they'll probably want to read your novels? Or will you just hide all your copies? Or are you very comfortable with the idea? Claire, let's go to you first.
Yeah, it's quite horrifying, the thought of it, to be honest. Yeah, they're definitely kind of classed as books just for grown-ups. They're instructed not to go near them at all. But yeah. I said, yeah, I have no idea how I'm going to approach that later on. Should be interesting, but they're such curious. God, they're clever little buggers, my kids. They run rings around me. So they will come up probably with really awesome questions about my books, and I'll probably suggest things that I wish I'd thought about when I wrote them, when they're much older. But no, it should be interesting. But I talk about all kinds of things with my kids, actually. Like I say, they are curious, clever little things. I think my entire education has been most used. I mean, like from school to degree level, I haven't used it in any job as much as I have being a mother answering random questions from the kids. So it feels like I have been educated just to raise two curious little kids. So yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Definitely, yeah, I can imagine. Emma, what about you? Because obviously Teddy's around the same age as Claire's kids, isn't she?
Mhm.
So what's your plan?
Yeah, so I'm really open with her about lots of different topics, and I'm very much of the belief that when a kid asks a question, if they're old enough to ask that question, then they're old enough to hear an answer, a truthful answer. And I think that is partly why I wrote the children's educational books. They're very kind of sex positive and kind of don't shy away from the fact that people have sex not just to make babies, which is a question that sort of lots of people ask about in terms of talking to their children about the LGBT relationships and sex education and things like that. And they sort of say, well, hang on a minute, at school they're being taught sex is to make a baby, but how do you explain intimacy between same-sex couples who can't make a baby together? So I like to think that those books do address that topic. In terms of my adult books, which have sex scenes in them, when she's old enough to read them, I don't mind if she reads them. We had a parent-teacher conference the other day, and her teacher said that she's reading at the expected level of an 11-year-old. So I am already, she's 8. I'm already kind of thinking to myself, what books can I get for her that are at the right reading level, but the content isn't too mature for her? So that's something that I'll be looking at, not just in terms of my books, but just generally across the whole breadth of what books are available, to find things that are the right maturity level for her reading ability.
Excellent. Yeah, my dad was very much asked the question, and we will be very honest with you. I think I asked about babies, where they came from, when I was 2, and I don't ever remember not knowing. You know, it's one of those, I think it's one of those things that, and we had books around, you know, sort of educational books. We had what I used to call the Bigger and Bigger book, which I think was called You and Your Child or something. It was one of these big, scary yellow, like sort of from the beginning to teenage years kind of books. And it obviously had the pregnancy, you know, month by month pictures, so that's why it was called the Bigger and Bigger book. But I remember pouring through that and being really interested in all the stuff that was in it, and you know, so yeah. What about you, Elsie? I'm making the massive assumption that you haven't got kids just because you haven't talked about them yet. But what about the members of your family and your books? So parents, aunties, uncles, cousins. What's your response to if they want to read your books?
My sister does read my books. Like she's the person. She was my first beta reader, and she does read quite a few of my things, and she, you know, enjoys them and stuff. I have had other family members read my books. I tend to be a bit like, I don't really know how to feel about it. Like generally, I'm just sort of like, all right, like. I don't know. I think I feel more relieved when family members go, I'm just not go, because I write sci-fi and fantasy stuff. It's easier for people to be like, I don't read that, and it's like good. It's like good. I'm relieved. I'm really like, you know, it's good. Like no one needs to read read my. I like to just imagine that all the people who read my books are just like people that I've never like, you know.
That totally makes sense. Yeah, my dad is my biggest fan. And with my first book, there are 2 masturbation scenes, and then there is a sex scene. There's always a sex scene at the end of my books because, you know, it's important. And I remember before he started reading it, because they all get a copy, because, you know, special family members. I remember him reading out some reviews of Hooked on You, and he got to a review that mentioned the masturbation scene, and he kind of started reading the sentence and then was like, I think I'm going to skip this one. And then we looked later and I was like, oh God. So yeah, it's one of those things that I don't mind my parents and various family members reading it. Certain people, I don't want to know their opinion about how it was, you know. So my mother-in-law, Sarah's mum, who's awesome, I think she's read all 3 of my published works, and yeah, they all have sex scenes in them, and she always says positive things about them, but yeah, the sex scenes don't get mentioned, which is nice. I'd rather they didn't. I remember my grandma Matthews, who's 93, and another awesome member of my family. She's like proper matriarch, Liverpudlian, very cool. She's got copies of, I think, my first 2, and yeah, I mentioned to her because she's very open. You can basically talk to her about anything. I mentioned to her that there were sex scenes in them, and she was like, just skip those. It's like,
yeah. I did have to like warn my just like, okay, most of the series is fine, but like this book at this specific point at this, maybe skip that chapter. Like maybe just like, it's fine, you'll get it from context afterwards, but like just that one, like rest of the series is fine, but like just skip it. Just skip it. Just like,
don't read that bit.
Yeah.
Because I come from a place, I mean, I was brought up in a very liberal household where, you know, everything was, you could talk about anything, nothing was taboo, kind of thing. And I think because I've been brought up like that, I want to be like that myself, and I really make an effort to be open and not try not to be too embarrassed about things like that. So yeah, that's the way that I do it, I guess. Right, let's have a look, see what other questions. Oh, there's so many wonderful questions. Oh, thank you, KJ. We've already answered that question. She's asking, how do you feel about your kids reading books? We've done that already. That's obviously something that people want to know about. Let's see. Wendy Hudson is asking, Claire Ashton, I love seeing all the adventures you share with your kids. Have they ever inspired you to consider writing books for children?
Hi, Wendy. And KJ and G. Benson, thanks for the questions. Yeah, I'd really love to. I mean, my kids are 9 and 7, and I read family story time. I read a lot of 9 to 12 range to them, and they are such a fantastic age range. They're so imaginative. You're so free to do so many things for that age range. They'll read anything, and they're fantastic books. So we're devouring the Murder Most Unladylike series at the moment by Robin Stevens, which is like a whodunit Agatha Christie style, but for teenage heroes, and you know, there's sapphic elements to it because it's set at a girls' boarding school, and you know, they find a couple of girls canoodling in the airing cupboard and fantastic things like this. It's just brilliant. So it's a very kids books in terms of diversity are brilliant as well. You can see it in YA. So it's some really exciting kids books out there, so well written, and I really would like to write 9 to 12 or YA actually. So as soon as I think of a compelling story, I think I will try that, because I read so much of it as well and really enjoy it. So yeah, my kids definitely do inspire ideas and little snippets of my romances already. So yes, I would try it.
Oh, brilliant. So Emma, obviously you've written educational stories for kids. Have you thought about doing any children's fiction?
I look at it sometimes and I think to myself, this should be something that you can get into, because you wouldn't need to write as many words for it to become a book, and it should be something that you could just kind of fall into, and you could get a few books out and add to your back catalogue. I worry that I would not be able to pitch it to the right age, in terms of making the reading level and the maturity level match up. And I think because I am so kind of blunt and open with Teddy, but I have to remind myself that other people aren't that way with their own children. And like, we went on a farm visit when lockdown eased during the summer, and it was mainly they'd had piglets born, and I was saying something to Teddy about, like, the best way to murder somebody and hide the body is in a pigsty, because pigs eat everything. And then I was thinking to myself, I should not actually be saying this in front of other people's children. The parents probably don't appreciate me just randomly saying this, but it doesn't cross my mind not to say it to my own child. So I think if I was going to write children's fiction, I would need to really look at what I was going to be writing and look at how to pitch it to the right age. So I don't have any ideas for any children's books at the moment.
Apart from maybe something Hannibal-esque.
But yeah, it would obviously involve some kind of murder with the body being eaten by pigs, which is a bit kind of Lord of the Flies type weirdness, isn't it? So yeah, not at the moment.
But I'm looking forward to reading something if you ever write it, because it's going to be really, it's going to be like Horrible Histories, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I should do. Maybe there's a very niche demographic of kids who would love to read a children's book by me.
You never know. Do you remember I'm trying to think, there was an Australian or possibly New Zealand author, something Jenkins, who wrote books beginning with unbelievable, stuff like that. And they used some of the storylines in Round the Twist. Do you remember Round the Twist? Oh, okay, never mind. They were quite macabre, quite weird, surreal sort of stories, and yeah, things like trying to get rid of flies with some kind of like manure chemical. It was all very, very strange, but they were brilliant books, and they were properly, like, I mean, that he probably would have done like Murder by Kids, that kind of things. Trying to think of his name, something Jenkins, I'm sure. Elsie, have you ever thought of writing kids books?
Not massively. I do write YA, but it tends to be the older level of YA and like people aging up out of like sort of aging up into new adult as the series goes on often. Yeah, I've been like thinking while you guys have been talking, I'm like, yeah, like, and then like sort of realizing I don't necessarily have a lot of children's books like in my, like, these are books I read as a child. I think I was just always ahead of like my reading age, to a point at which I don't really like. I guess I did kind of consume a few of the Mary-Kate and Ashley books, and like, you know, Jacqueline Wilson books definitely like were like that, but that was like really like when I'm thinking back to like, yeah, children's books, it really starts at like Jacqueline Wilson books and then just goes up to like older ages. So I'm not, it's one of those things where it's like I don't know the market at all, because I don't like I've always read ahead.
I love Jacqueline Wilson, but I think that is quite that some of the stuff that she talks about is quite teenage, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's very older middle grade, I would say. It's like not, it's like it's not always quite YA, but it's definitely older middle grade is where I would put those kinds of books. And yeah, I'm just trying to think and be like, yeah, these are the children's books, like, and it's like, no, I think I was just all like, you know, by the time other people my age were reading YA, I was reading adult books. So like when I was like younger, I was reading YA, and so it's just this like cycle of like, yeah, and so I don't like, I don't have a massive memory or fondness for children's books and stuff. And yeah, maybe if/when I have my own kids, it'll be a thing where it's like, oh, now I know about children's books, and it's a thing that, like, you know, I'm inspired to write about and stuff. But yeah, at the minute, I'm just like, yeah, children's books exist.
Emma, you've got something to say.
Yes, so I found that for the last couple of years, because Teddy's reading age has progressed, she reads to herself. She doesn't read to me anymore. And even though I ask her, why don't you just read me a few pages from the book? She's like, no, I can read it in my head. So, and because that's a skill she's learned, that's something that she wants to do. So I don't know what the contents of these books are. So when somebody says, oh, have you ever thought about writing a children's book? I'm like, well, I don't actually know what's out there at the moment, because Teddy reads to herself now. And I've read lots of sort of teen, young adult books. A few years ago, a couple of years running, I took part in the shortlisting for the Carnegie and let's say Kate Greenaway awards that was done through my work at the library. So I've read quite a few of those they're sort of young teen, late teen sort of books, but not the kind of middle grade sort of 9 to 12 age range. So it's a bit of a kind of black hole mystery of what those books are actually about, because the children that are reading those books are reading them in their heads, not out loud to their parents. So they could be about absolutely anything.
Yeah, and you no idea. Well, I guess this is a weird one, because I actually have written a children's book. The plan was to do a series, but my illustrator had a kid, so he doesn't have time to paint my dog anymore, basically. It's called Whisper Meets a Wiggle, and it's based on a true story when my cat brought in a worm. Basically, it's about Whisper because she's awesome. And yeah, I've got a couple more kind of ideas in my head, but because my illustrator's otherwise occupied, they're probably not going to come to fruition. But it's fine. Right, let's go back to the questions. KJ is asking, how much inspiration do you pull from actual family members for your fictional characters? Elsie, let's go with you first.
Absolutely none at all. Definitely none. That is my final and legal answer that I will stand by forever and ever. And yeah, that's it. Nope. Never ever taken inspiration for it. To be honest, I'm joking but honestly, yeah, I don't, because I know that some of my family members read my stuff, and it's like, no. Like, I don't want that kind of drama. I don't want any level of like, oh, this kind of reminds. It's like, nope, absolutely, entirely fictional. If I even think that I'm starting to get a bit too like, it's like, nope, got to rewrite that character because it's too close to this. It's like, nope. Complete nope.
That makes sense. What about you, Emma?
I don't think I've got any characters that are based even loosely on real people. My book, my adult book, is mainly about a mother-daughter relationship, and I do kind of worry that if my mum reads it, she might kind of think that it's an inference of our relationship, and maybe I've sort of exaggerated the conflicts of the mother-daughter relationship that I've experienced in order to create this sort of situation that the main character finds herself in, but it isn't based on real life. But yeah, so no, not really.
Cool. Claire, are you going to break the mold by saying, yes, every single one of your books is based on your family?
Well, not necessarily on my family, but based on real people all the time. Yeah. especially the kind of the sort of core of a person. So they might not look like that person or would sound like the person, but yeah, no, there's yeah, I mean, each character, I think, I mean, always a bit of yourself goes into almost every character. And I pull things from people I know all the time, snippets of conversation, their mannerisms. I think like my favorite parent in my books is probably Poppy Jenkins' mum, and she's based her general manner and her 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 disposition is based on a school friend's mum who was just lovely when I was growing up, and it's set where I grew up, so that was very inspiring for that book. And then the mother in the latest book, Anna's mother in Finding Jessica Lambert, she's quite horrific and manipulative and homophobic in a very polite way. So she's, so it doesn't sound homophobic, but very much is. She's set the basis of her is on another friend's mother from years ago who I was really quite stunned by at the time. But no, real people definitely inspire characters, although they will, I mean, with anything, any character I start with, a lot of ingredients go into that character, and at some point they'll, instead of being the ingredients, they are this fully defined, speaking, behaving individual. So a lot of ingredients go in, but it's always somebody distinct and individual comes out. But yeah, no, I use real people all the time.
Excellent. Well, like, it's funny because I had a bit of a strange teenage period. We moved from Derbyshire to Weston-Super-Mare when I was 14, and I didn't have a great time. I'll be honest. My sister was just going into year 7, so she was absolutely fine. So everybody was new, so it was okay for her. But I was going into year 10, and it was just like, it was rubbish, I'll be honest. I got really badly bullied. I was northern and nobody understood my accent, and I was a bit weird anyway, so I just kind of played on that. So I was quite sort of introverted, and I didn't really interact with my parents an awful lot whilst I was a teenager, I don't think. My sister was quite adolescent and quite rebellious, and did all the things that you expect a teenager to do, messy bedrooms and things like that, but I was always the good one, so I was always kind of under the radar, I think. So when I'm writing my teenage girl, daughter, mother type relationships, I think I make them quite good and quite healthy relationships, just because I don't feel like I had that when I was a teenager, not from any kind of fault of anybody, but I think just because I was going through some stuff, me and my mum didn't have that kind of close relationship that we do now. So yeah, I like it when my teenage characters say something that's really grown up, because then it kind of shocks their parents, and it's like, oh, okay, cool. And also you can get a lot of humor from like teenagers taking the piss basically out of the parents, which happened a lot when I was a kid. Like, yeah, we took the mickey out of my parents a lot. So yeah, that's kind of the way it's happened for me, I think. Let's have a little look. G Benson is back. She says, if you could go on a coffee date or a chat with one of the family members of your main characters, who would you go with and why? Should we go to Claire first?
Great questions. Family member of a main character. I'm going to go and chill out with Poppy's mum. Maybe smoke something vaguely illegal, only a little bit illegal, and chill out a bit, I think, for old time's sake.
Lovely. That sounds very appropriate. Elsie, who would you go for a coffee with?
Oh, okay, that's really difficult because I write like families, most of them then end up becoming main characters. Like if they interest me enough, it's like then they become their own main characters. So it's like, is that cheating? Is that I think, okay, I mean, it's still slightly cheating. I think I'm going to go with, for my Ember Academy for Young Witches series, I'm going to go with Maria, who is technically not related to the main character Amelia, but she does basically adopt it. Like it's that kind of found family dynamic where she's like, oh no, this tiny lesbian is mine now. I don't really know. So I'm like, yeah, I would totally hang out with Maria. She would be like best character.
Definitely. I like a found family. I've got a found family in my 4th book, which is out in February, because my character Amber, her parents have kind of disowned her and they're not interested at all. So she's in AA. So her found family is kind of around AA and the support that she receives from there. So she's got her sponsor, she's got her landlady who's also in AA, who's a trans woman called Jilly. I think I'd go for a coffee with Jilly because she's quite cool. She's a gardener by trade and she's got a little dog. And yeah, she's sort of halfway between an auntie and a big sister, sort of, to Amber. And she's really supportive and very cool and quite confident about herself. So I think I'd go out with Jilly. What about you, Emma?
Okay, so I only really have the one option because I've only got one main character and she's only really got one family member, which is her mum, who she has the conflict with in the book. So Scarlett's mum, Marie, if I went out to have coffee with her, it would probably be to give her a bit of a talking to and tell her to stop being such a bitch to her daughter, and to just kind of try and get her to hold a mirror up to herself and sort of say, just because you're in age, the adult, doesn't mean that you've got the right to sort of dictate Scarlett's life to her. So yeah, it would be her.
Excellent. So you're going to tell her off. That's
Yeah.
2 Maries, isn't it? As Elsie wants to go for a coffee with Marie as well. Cool. So we have time for one more question. KJ is asking, does it frustrate you if kids aren't written well in books? We'll go to Elsie first.
Yeah, I think I tend to, again, with mostly teenagers, because my memory is shocking. So despite the fact I have like younger, so like I'm the oldest of like all my siblings and cousins, I'm still like remembering past, but you know that they've all hit 18 now, so it's like remembering past. It's like, yes,
Me too. I'm the oldest.
Yeah, it's like, how do children, again, I have beta readers who are parents and are very good at like being like, no, you do know how to write children, you're fine. Like, it's, you know, so it's those things. I'm like, yes, I do know how to do this. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if I would recognize it in like child characters. But definitely with teenagers, I think there's a lot of writing them younger than teenagers come across. I think there is just a huge thing in YA where YA is sort of seen as like, you know, there's a very American influence on what is and isn't allowed in YA. Like, you know, that you couldn't possibly have your characters use swear words. You couldn't possibly have your characters like talk about sex and stuff. And I'm just like sitting there like, mates, we were all on 4chan. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, you know, so those things where it's like you couldn't possibly have teenagers talk about like doing the drugs or drinking alcohol. And I'm just like, that is what teenagers do. That is what even me, who did not leave the house, who did not like hang out with like, you know, who wasn't going to like, you know, I wasn't down the town where like I was staying in my house reading books. Even I like, you know, was you know, talking about so yeah, there's definitely, I think that frustrates me. There's definitely like a vein of like YA that is very like, no, teenagers have never once ever said a swear or thought about sex or you know, don't like even would never contemplate even touching a sip of alcohol or doing the drugs. That's, how dare you imply that a teenager would ever. It's just like that infuriates me.
Emma, what do you think? So does it annoy you if kids aren't written well in books?
Yeah, so it tends to be the speech that kids use in books that tends to not quite fit their age. So it's things like whether a child refers to himself in the third person and things like that and what age they might do that, but then at what age they stop doing that and start using other speech patterns. So sometimes you find that the speech that a child uses in a book just doesn't match the age that the author has said that they are. And then I suppose equally, if it's a young child who's sort of between kind of a baby and a toddler, sometimes they have them speaking and walking at an age where, yes, I'm sure some babies can do that, but it would be unusual and it would be a big deal to have like the 9-month-old baby walking, which I have seen a 9-month-old baby who can walk, but it was like a big deal. So sometimes I wonder if they've completely researched at what age different developmental things happen for younger children, and then with older children it's more about the way that they speak and the sort of speech patterns that they use that sometimes is frustrating when you read about it.
Definitely. I think language patterns are a big indicator of how old a child is, especially mentally, let alone actually, you know, physically how old they are. So yeah, it's a really good point, that. Claire, what about you?
Yeah, I think because kids are very variable, aren't they? I mean, like you say, that you might have a 5-year-old who is very mature, has a reading age much greater. So it can be quite jarring. And I think the main problem with that is that maybe the author just hasn't treated them as a fully rounded person, rather than they're just trying to have a little kind of, they're a kid, it's a 5-year-old, they'll say this. Whereas if they were thinking, yes, this is a child who is speaking like this, because actually they're quite mature. So I think that's probably what the problem is. So you can have kids who maybe speak in a less mature way than their age group, or more mature, but you have to treat them as that rounded individual. I think that's more the problem. So you might have, in some books, the kids might be sound all sweetness and light, and I see complaints of kids being too smart, a bit of a smart ass in books a lot. But then I have 2 kids. One is one who comes up and gives me a cuddle and says, "I love you" all day long. You know, it's just like Hallmark kind of movie kid. And then there's, you know, the girl who's a little smart ass, and she is absolutely one of those kids causing trouble in books. So yeah, kids are as diverse as grown-ups. So I think actually you have to treat them as the fully formed character, and then you're more likely to hit it right. I think
Definitely. Some really interesting points, and things that have made me think, definitely. Thank you so much for your input, guys. It's been wonderful. We're gonna end that now because it's nearly 12:15. We've got another thing to do, which is going to be lunch. I'm having some lunch now. It's dinner time for me. So everybody that's watching, thank you very much for all your questions. Guys, if you could go to the comments and see if there's anything that you want to answer that we haven't answered in the panel, that would be amazing. And yeah, we'll see you after lunch, guys. It will be a reading. We're going to hear from Kit Mallory and Chris Zett, and that's at 1:30. Okay, see you then.
Thank you, Jen.